And welcome back to the Hot Lap. We are talking the Saudi Arabian Grand Prix Practice 1 and Practice 2 that happened on a Thursday, not a Friday. And as you can probably see for our headline, Practice 2, Alonso fastest. Practice 1, as you can see probably to the left of me if you're watching, Verstappen fastest. So, Alonso fastest in the most meaningful practice time. But what other headlines are there? Well, we've got Verstappen pretty much saying it's going to be a really tight qualifying. Yes, let's hope we are going to be squeaky and sweaty in a good way because of excitement in that Q3 session. Fingers crossed. Mercedes race pace is, funny enough, interestingly unknown, and it's Lewis Hamilton that's currently struggling. George Russell looking good, but neither are entirely happy with the car. Not even George and Lewis. It's all about that rear end again. Oh dear. And then last but not least, a challenging day for Carlos Sainz. Really quite ill. But despite that, Ferrari looking quite good again. So let's get into the fact that Practice 1 and Practice 2, and the fact that Alonso was fastest for Practice 2, but it was Verstappen in Practice 1, which took place in the daylight, not as relevant, some might say. Not Verstappen, but to be fair to Alonso, he was second in Practice 1. Perez third, just 2/10 off, and Russell in fourth, who's been looking good all weekend. Then we had Leclerc and Sainz, and then it was Norris in seventh. So far, the McLaren, especially, I can't help but feel in Practice 1 looked a bit disappointing. We'll get into Practice 2 in a bit. Hamilton 8th, Stroll 9th, Albon in the top 10, albeit yes, it is FP1. Then we had Bottas, Ricciardo, Ocon, Sargent, Piastri, Tsunoda 17th for Gasly, 18th out. The last two, no surprise there, kind of like Bahrain, Hulkenberg and Magnussen. But what, I mean, are they going to be out qualifying the Alpine, who are currently going through an absolute disaster, let's be fair. So let's have a quick look at Practice 2. So Practice 2 took place a bit later on in the evening. It was dark, the lights were on, and Fernando Alonso, the oldest man on the grid, was fastest by just over 2/10, 0.230 from Mercedes' own George Russell, with Verstappen in third, just over 3/10 off. Leclerc within about four, within just over, with just over 3.5 tenths, looking good. Perez fifth, Stroll in sixth. That Aston, I think the fact that Stroll is sixth, yes, Stroll, maybe, no Fernando Alonso, let's say, but the fact that Stroll is sixth, I think, is looking good for the Aston Martin team. Sainz in seventh, 6/10 off. He was very ill. Most concerning, though, for me, Lewis Hamilton, 6/10 off the fastest, struggling somewhat. They need to do some setup work overnight. Gasly in ninth in the Alpine, so that either makes you think that Alpine have come good suddenly, or everyone else is putting on those sandbags. And let's hope McLaren are putting on those sandbags, because they were 10th and 12th in Practice 2. They, Tsunoda, yes, the RP Tsunoda split them. 13th Zhou, 14th Albon, 15th Ocon, 16th Sargent, 17th Magnussen, 18th Hulkenberg, 19th Ricciardo, 19th Bottas, 20th. One caveat though with Lewis Hamilton is he did have something to do with his software and his engine, so I'm hoping that's one of the reasons why he's a bit slow. I don't know. But here from Formula 1 is the practice debrief. Why the data suggests a tight fight for pole in Jeddah by F1's very own Lawrence Barretto. So let's go all the way down. They've got a few light charts. And here's the race simulation pace, obviously with Red Bull looking the best. But interestingly, it's Mercedes in second, 0.21 off. And that's going to be interesting, isn't it? Now, a lot of people suspected they'll be a lot better in Bahrain under race pace. Hamilton suspected that as well with his setup. Indeed, over in Practice 2 afterwards, he said they've kind of gone their own ways on setup. And we've got McLaren in third. I mean, look at that. When you look, if I can I zoom it in a tiny bit more? Let's see, sort of. Okay, I mean, if you look at Mercedes, Ferrari and McLaren, they are so close, 3/10 apart on average, supposedly. And then Aston Martin, a bit, but Haas looking better than a lot of people think. I mean, they're ahead of Williams, RB, Alpine and Sauber. A lot of people have said this is not necessarily going to show the true form of pace, but it's kind of like a guide, let's say. A guide. Red Bull fastest, Mercedes second, Ferrari third, McLaren fourth, Aston Martin fifth, on that race pace simulation. And they've even said that Ferrari's looking like a strong threat to Red Bull. But if we continue below and we look at qualifying pace, it was now Ferrari that are going to be the closest to Red Bull, Mercedes in the middle, and then Aston Martin. And McLaren again a bit way off. I wouldn't expect McLaren to be that far off, which is why I'm not 110%, let's say, confident in these figures. But McLaren like to do their own thing in practice 1 and 2, don't they? And it says here Alpine, the second slowest in qualifying pace, with Sauber the slowest. I don't think so. But Alonso, I think, looks to be put in the picture, at least in qualifying, if not race pace. The race pace was, I think, a fair bit slower than Red Bull's. A lot of other people are saying, but they're qualifying. Would it surprise me if Aston Martin were on the front row? No, probably not. So let's get into then. Let's get very much into that. But not the Bahrain, no, the Saudi Arabian form guide. Who do we think is going to be hot? Well, here we go. I mean, let's be fair. Max Verstappen, absolutely, he is going to be. He's hot, isn't he? He's hot. Favourite for pole. Favourite for the race, easily. However, I also think we've got Fernando Alonso and George Russell. Yeah, this guy here. My apologies. George Russell looking good for qualifying, I think, and potentially looking good for the race. He is currently on form at the moment, making Lewis Hamilton look a bit meh, let's say. All can change for the race though. And I think Lewis he got to within 4 or 5 seconds of George in Bahrain, didn't he? So there we go. So dear old George, I don't have Fernando here, but I think Fernando is looking strong as well, and so is this guy, Charles Leclerc. Charles Leclerc also looking strong going into the race. I mean, personally, I think Charles Leclerc could surprise us. It wouldn't surprise me if he is on the front row. Wouldn't surprise me at all. But this guy here, yeah, I found him. Fernando Alonso. He's another guy that's looking hot, I think. Maybe not for the race, but looking hot for a very good qualifying position. But I do expect him to hit that reverse gear after the first few laps of the race. But you never know. He led the Saudi Arabian Grand Prix last year, didn't he? Which was no bad thing, let's say. So let's get into the rest of our stories then. Deep breath while I try and find. There it is. So next up, we've got Verstappen basically saying it's going to be a very tight qualifying, Formula1.com. And then after finishing behind both on Aston Martin and the Mercedes in Thursday's practice session, reigning champion Max Verstappen has predicted what's going to be a hard-fought qualifying. Yes, the Dutchman that had to settle for P3 in FP2 held under the floodlights in conditions more akin to those who were facing qualifying in the race. Aston Martin's Fernando Alonso and Mercedes' George Russell finished ahead of him. Alonso by a good 3/10, and he said it will again be very tight, said Verstappen. When asked about his prediction, he went on to saying, I think this is probably where other people are a bit better than us over one lap. Our car probably comes a bit more alive on the long run, as it did in the second half of 22 and all of 23, which is kind of depressing. And he did say, I think overall we've learned a lot. Of course, there's always things you can look at to do better over a one lap performance, but I think some teams already, they used a little bit more power than they did in Bahrain, so we'll take that also into consideration. But when we went to the long runs, it looks again quite nice, so quite happy with that. Okay, fair enough. Thumbs up to you, Mr. Verstappen. Also, it says here Lewis is lacking one thing that he needs from the Mercedes W14 at the Saudi Arabian Grand Prix. We've already given you a preview. It is that lovely rear end. Yes, Hamilton said all he needs is a stable Mercedes W15 rear end to be happy at the Saudi Arabian Grand Prix. Now, Mercedes and Hamilton went into the Grand Prix weekend looking for an improved display after, let's be honest, a fairly lackluster Bahrain. And don't forget, him and George Russell were hamstrung by engine issues in Bahrain. Hopefully, they're fairly confident they've sorted it out for this race. Hamilton ended the second practice session, which is, as we know, more representative, down in P8. And that's 4/10 of Russell's pace, which is quite unusual. Now, while Hamilton was also given a reprimand for impeding Paul Ogle Sargent During the FP2 session, speaking to reporters, Hamilton said, a difficult day, just lacking the confidence in the rear of the car. He said, the setup we did some work session to session, changed the car quite a bit, but the underlying issue was the rear end that I was struggling with, and I had a couple of really big moments out there. In these high speed areas, you need to have full faith, amen you do, Lewis, to the rear of the car, and I just don't have that yet. He went on to say, saying George is a lot happier with his car. We kind of went in different directions today. We were trying different things to try and find the right solution for the car. But all I want is something with a stable rear, and then I'll be happy. So that's what I'm working on. So fingers crossed for Mercedes. I think I'll be very surprised if Hamilton does qualify P8, or at least, and also doesn't finish his P8 in the race. But we shall see, because once again, like we said in our preview, safety cars are going to be an issue, aren't they? So, our next story, Carlos Sainz made Saudi F1 practice a very difficult day. Yep, driver Carlos Sainz said he couldn't push the limits on a very difficult practice day for Formula One's Saudi Arabian Grand Prix due to being struck by illness. It says here, Sainz cancelled his media commitments on Wednesday after feeling unwell. Poor guy. He finished 7th in Thursday evening's representative second practice, 6/10 behind pace hitter Alonso, but only 3/10 behind his Ferrari teammate Charles Leclerc. And after the session, Sainz was seen having to compose himself in the cockpit. Poor guy. He went through a difficult 24 hours having to take it easy in practice due to his condition. And obviously a very difficult day after feeling sick, Sainz explained. The last 24 hours have been tough and difficult for me. And he said today was all about trying to get myself on track as much as possible from the car without really pushing too much the limits, as I was still a bit on the non-ideal side, but we managed to complete the program without issues. Hopefully tomorrow I'm feeling better, he said, even if probably I will not be 100%, but feeling better will allow me to be more on the limit and perform a good Saturday. So yeah, fingers crossed for Carlos Sainz. Also, what I thought was fairly interesting. This is the upgrade list from Formula Races on Twitter. We've got Red Bull 3 circuit-specific upgrades, Mercedes a performance upgrade, Ferrari ×2 C-Spec, I'm not too sure, McLaren ×2 C-Spec, Aston Martin a performance and C-Spec, Williams 2x C-Spec, and VCARB, as in RB, 1 performance and ×3 C-Spec. Interesting, nothing for Alpine, Haas or Sauber. Yeah, so that's pretty much it. Like and subscribe if you made it towards the end. That would absolutely be fantastic. Comment below. Let us know who you think's going to win the race. And so let's just remind ourselves of the people that are on form going into the Saudi Arabian Grand Prix. I think this guy here is a interesting bet if you wanted to look at a front row, or at least a top 3 result in qualifying. The race, not so much, but Alonso, looking quite tasty if I'm honest. George Russell as well, looking on form, but compared to Lewis Hamilton, he beat Hamilton in Bahrain qualifying in the race. The race was a lot closer. Hamilton was catching him, but George Russell does look a lot more comfortable in his Mercedes. Both drivers have said they're not too happy with their Mercedes car. Hamilton moaning about the rear end. Leclerc, yes, losing about 0.4 seconds a lap with his brake issue in Bahrain. Looking good for qualifying here. Let's be fair, he would have had pole position in Bahrain had he been able to match his lap from Q2. Alas, he didn't. Favourite for the race, I think, Max Verstappen. I think probably favourite for pole, but I think a lot less so than even in Bahrain, and it wouldn't surprise me if, for example, Leclerc gets it. Could Alonso get it, Aston's first ever pole, or even Leclerc, George Russell? I think all to play for in Bahrain. This has been the Hot Lap. Thank you very much, and we will speak to you after qualifying. Stay tuned for all the F1 news.